Productive Pastor 92, 3 things your database does. Welcome back, my friends. Another episode of Productive Pastor. Excited to see you or hear you on the internet. I love this community. This is always so much fun. And it's just wild to think over the last 10 years how big of a part of my life this has become, but also just the relationships I've built up through the pastors and the ministry leaders that are kind of part of the larger Productive Pastor ecosystem. So stoked to have you here. Last episode I talked about, finding clarity and how I found clarity. And I love just being here with you and talking about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite parts of strategic ministry and strategic productivity is your church database and what that can do. Before we jump into that, though, I've got something I want to talk to you about. This spring, I've got a workshop series that's going to have 3 different sections. It's going to have a meeting in February, a meeting in March, and a meeting in April. And there are so many awesome things that are just kind of part of that. And today, a little bit of our episode is going to be, about one of those things, and it's a critical piece of all of that. It's a critical piece for strategic ministry. But what these workshop series are going to be designed around is an ongoing conversation that I have been having mainly online on Twitter with pastors of normal-sized churches, of those churches that are sitting, 65 to 100, 125 people. And, that's a lot of the folks that listen to Productive Pastor. I know that much through just the conversations and surveys inside the Productive Pastor community, that sort of thing. But what does it mean to find just healthy ministry and kind of solving one of the unique conundrums that I'm hearing more and more from folks. But all 3 of these workshops are going to be about what does it mean to understand church size and to see new people into your church. Now, the February workshop, which is coming up, is called Establish a Growth Game Plan. This is a iteration of a workshop I've been teaching for a year. I think I've had 9 or 10 physical workshops, and I've taught it online a couple of times, and then have been working through this idea with tons of pastors and so many different scenarios. But it's called Establish a Growth Game Plan, and it's about that first step of what does it mean to see a normal-sized church reach people in a unique incarnational way. And this first workshop is all about dispelling some of the myths and the anxieties of growth in the normal-sized church. The second workshop is going to be the March section. It's called Creating an Invitational Culture. Now, I've taught a workshop titled this before, but what I've realized in the power of iteration is there's a very specific conversation that needs to happen that is the midpoint of seeing, congregational health and sustainability, and then moving forward, inviting new people. And so much of this is about really assessing where the congregation is currently at through the framework of 3 things: a static church, a welcoming church, or an intentionally invitational church. And then our April workshop, the last one is this. It's called Growing Integrated Disciples. And this is not just about welcoming new people and new follow-up systems, but, taking your existing people who are in your church and are potentially non-engaged and moving them towards being engaged. Now, each of these workshops will only cost $25 a piece. And so, if you do all 3, the full meal deal, you're talking about a $75 investment, which when you look at what a lot of folks are just are investing in this sorts of things across the internet, this is a fabulous, fantastic deal. And I'm hoping just to continue expanding these workshops and this content, but I can't tell you it's going to be $25 a section in perpetuity. So if you want to jump into this, go to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/092. You can find the link to be part of the Establish Your Growth Game Plan workshop, and that throws you into the sequence for everything. I'm also talking about this on my Productive Pastor emails. If you're signed up for those, I send out a weekly, very specific, tactical conversation point about a monthly focus. This month, talking a lot about sermon planning and your sermon preparation system, your sermon calendar, that sort of stuff. But then also you'll be hearing about those in that email list. So that's how you can find out about that, or you can follow me anywhere online at Rev Chad Brooks to find links to where you can sign up to those, because I would love to see you as part of that. But our conversation today, 3 things your database does. And this really hits at every single level of those workshops. But hey, done talking about workshops. Now we're here to talk about your database. Now, I say database. Chad, what do you mean here? Some folks call it a database. Some folks call it a church management system. And the two words are fairly interchangeable. And to help us understand, why our database matters so much, some of it I think is to talk about the beginnings of church databases and where this happened. And we really see the beginning point of just having a church database is actually inside of a lot of the financial solutions that started showing up in the 90s and early 2000s of just the bookkeeping software your church had. And over time, people realized, hey, we're already getting their names and their addresses for just the kind of necessary communication at the end of the year. Why don't we begin just tweaking these things out to also be a people management solution? And so you see the church database just kind of grow and grow and grow from there. You see some people begin to change this in the late 2000s, early 2010, saying, hey, let's begin building community around those. And over time, you've seen these tools just grow and grow and grow and grow. Now, before we jump in, people are always saying, hey, Chad, what's your favorite database? My answer for all things church management database solution is to look at Planning Center. They have an amazing, fantastic ecosystem which covers so many of the things that your church does. I don't get any money from Planning Center. Don't have any relationship with them. I wish I did, but I don't. But if you've never jumped into this before and you're like saying, hey, or you might have an existing database that's just kind of trash and you're like, hey, this isn't useful for us at all. It's good for bookkeeping. And then we have this massive member database, which we don't know what to do in there. If you want to find a solution to that, Planning Center. Planning Center really is the thing. I remember when I stepped into my first church full-time as a pastor, we used a software called Church Windows, and I think I might have tried to open it 3 times in 3 years, and it was so clunky, I just thought, this really doesn't work so much. And it was through the journey of church planning in the 2010s that I realized, oh my goodness, the database matters so much. And then through COVID is where it really ramped up, and it got to the point to where I had a second monitor on my desk that was our church database. And I used it so much, it had its own dedicated monitor. I lived inside of Planning Center so much. So here are the 3 things your church database does and why this matters so much for ministry in the modern era. And you might be thinking, Chad, my church is only like 50 people on Sunday morning. Do we really need this? Well, we're about to talk about those 50 people, but my answer is going to be yes, because it just makes things so much cleaner. So here's the first thing your church database does. It helps you see your true church. Because this is why your Sunday morning church, it isn't your congregation. So many times we look at the people that we see around us, just that 1 hour on Sunday, or as the pastor, the people you see every single week, but you look out and you're looking at your average worship attendance. And hey, Chad, this is like 55 people. Surely this should not be so complicated. But here's the thing, and I'm telling you this, and this is based off of conversations with dozens of pastors and working with dozens of churches over the last couple of years. I have never seen a church where their actual church size is just their Sunday morning attendance. Even in the very small church that I'm pastoring bivocationally right now, where our Sunday attendance will be anywhere from like 13 to 25 folks on a good Sunday. We averaged 19 in worship across 2023. Using the idea of the metric of what I call active adults, we have 40 plus people inside of our database as active. Now think about the difference of that. Think about the challenges there. I might think I'm pastoring 15 people, but I'm really pastoring at least 40% and 40 people. And my active adult metric is, it is pretty conservative. It's very, very objective. I love to measure active adults by, people who really hit one of 3 categories. Is this person giving to the church? Is this person serving somewhere in the church? And is this person inside of any discipleship system? Now, if you're in a normal-sized church, you can add Sunday morning attendance to that, but only if you have names for every single one of those people. We're not going to go back down in the rabbit hole into active adults. I've got a couple different articles I'm going to link to in the show notes where I talk about this a little bit more, or you can be part of these workshops and learn about active adults. Because this is the scenario that I'm seeing, and it's 2 different scenarios that both are showing kind of the same issue. I've got one friend, and I talk to a lot of churches that they're seeing sometimes upward of 300% of what they see on Sunday morning attendance are actually the active adults in their conversation. And especially the larger your church is, the more I think this percentage is bigger. Like I was working with a pastor today, they see around 400 people on Sunday morning, but they can easily identify 960 people that are inside of their span of care. Another friend of mine, similar sized church, they did the active adult rundown, and all they had to, at this point in time, what they had to do was pull out their entire membership roster, and them and some staff sat down and over the course of a day and highlighted almost 1,100 names of people they knew they had encountered and interacted with in a measurable way over the course of the last 90 days. It's not odd at all for me to see churches, seeing they're smaller, normal-sized churches of 60, 70 people that they go through an exercise like this and they find 130 or 140 names. And here's the deal. That's a very different church than what you're experiencing. I've also worked with another pastor of a church of around 80 or 90. No. They're probably 150, 160 on Sunday. They ran the active adult matrix and they got 35 names. So two very different scenarios that are showing the same place is that their actual true church was not who they saw on Sunday morning. Now, what does your database helping you see your true church do for you? Well, it allows you to set up filters and run these lists to see these names as often as you need to. Now, imagine what is it like once a month for you to run that system, taking 5 minutes and then getting a giant list of these are all the adults that have proactively and have in an objective way engaged with our church in the last month. That's going to allow you to make so many different decisions, not based off of your perceived church, but like your true church who you is. Now, if your church is seeing, 150% more people in the church you see on Sunday mornings, that's a completely different conversation about engagement. If you're in the church that sees, 150 on Sunday mornings, but only has 40 active people, that's a very entirely different engagement level of conversation. And your database is going to allow you to communicate to people based off of that engagement system, and then also begin to define strategies towards who your true church actually is. And there are ways that you can see this and measure this and respond to this that your database makes easy. If we're just talking paper and emailing people or text messaging people one by one, this sort of thing can take hours, if not days, and is absolutely not possible to do in normal-sized church ministry. But if you're actively using a modern church database and using a handful of tools that are inexpensive, if not absolutely free, you can begin to build engagement strategies that are absolutely groundbreaking for your church. And that leads us to the second thing your database does, is it stuffs the cracks that people fall through. It is easy to fall through the cracks in church, or it's easy. You can do all the work to have an amazing invitational campaign, to have a wide open front door for your church, and then have 10 different back doors that people can leave through just as quickly. Now, yet again, you can figure this stuff out and deal with these challenges without your database, but it's going to take a significant longer amount of time than if you had a healthy database system set up and you had the strategies to walk through this. Now, you might be saying, Chad, how does this actually matter? Let's talk about attendance frequency. Now, I'm 43 years old. I grew up in church. My dad was a pastor. When I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, if you went to church 3 or 4 weeks a month. That was normal. It was, at that point in time, you could handle things with a paper newsletter, some bulletin information, and a pulpit announcement, and you could trust that the majority of your church could find out what they needed to know. But our world's a lot more complicated now. People communicate in many different ways. And how many times have you said, Chad, we put this in an email, we put this in a text message, we put this in a Facebook update, we put this here, 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 and here, and people still don't understand what's going on. Friends, that's a shotgun approach to a problem that really needs rifle-level accuracy. The second thing I think that's important to think through, and this has been showing up in some research and some stuff that folks are coming up with in the last 6 months, 12 months, is that for a lot of people, church engagement and attendance is actually seen as a marker of affluence. And this sounds kind of crazy, but one of the things that someone said is, if you are not married with children in a stable, like 9 to 5 type job and you have the margin of time to be active in church, church is actually really complicated, if not hard, to be part of. So if you are a single parent, or if you're doing shift work, or if you're a student, or all these sorts of things, our kind of, legacy systems for church management and just, managing people and communicating and that sort of stuff, they're actually really, really difficult at a cultural level. I remember back before the pandemic, I read a statistic that said that 1 out of every 3 American working adults is working on Sunday morning. And I imagine now that percentage has increased, so much even more. One of the things that made us begin thinking about this type of database strategy when I was church planting was we were going through trying to discern people to put on a leadership board, and somebody brought up church attendance. And a name came up, and somebody said, well, they're never here. They're only here like once a month. Surely they can't be that active in the church. And we pulled our database information, said, well, they have a scheduled gift coming into the church every other week. And they're serving at one of our mission ministries. They're serving there twice a month, and they're meeting in this men's prayer group on Friday mornings, and they're like super, super engaged. And they were working in a job field that had them traveling for work a lot. They had parents that were getting older that lived away from town, and they'd have to go travel to take care of parents. And I was like, and also, I know this person really well. They've told me before, they only have usually, between all of the life circumstances at play, they only have one Sunday a month that they can come to church. And so that's not barring, them getting sick, somebody in their family getting sick, or them just like working for 10 days in a row, and they might really need some extra sleep that morning or to take care of stuff. Attendance frequency is a very, very, kind of complicated thing. And so just thinking somebody's engagement is attendance and worship on Sunday morning is the main marker for things. Your database will help you show it. This is where people really are active. But also it's the second thing of this. For the longest time, it was really up to the pastor or the church leaders who defined this is what it means to be engaged in our church. I'm not even going to use the language of membership anymore. But that's kind of unfair because, how many times have you seen someone that is only at your church, 5 or 6 times a year, and something happens in life where they actually need their church or they need a pastor, and they reach out and you find out that, wow, they've actually considered themselves to be, a lot more involved and much of a kind of an owner in our ministry than we were. Friends, we don't get to say who comes to our church. The people who come to our church are the ones who are saying we are coming and we're parting this faith community. And so in some ways, your database, stuffing those cracks that people fall through, this is a way to manage the spiritual influence that Jesus has given us and these people that he puts in our care. And this is kind of like a core value I've had of just kind of evangelism and incarnational ministry over the last decade is that Jesus trusts us with people. And at that point in time, it's up for our faithfulness and for us to be faithful with those he's entrusted us to. And I could go on and on and on about that, but I'm not going to on this podcast episode. But, your database is going to allow you to manage not just but your church's span of care in a much more effective and strategic way that saves you time for doing the things that we actually call ministry. It lets you build communication systems based on, actual engaged metrics and that sort of thing. And as I talk to churches a lot of times that want to see growth or they need to see growth for the sake of sustainability, one of the things I tell them is like, if you really kind of can't manage the people you already have, what makes you think you're going to be able to manage new people that get introduced into just kind of a faulty system anyway? So, your database stuffs the cracks that people fall through. And this even matters in the normal size church now. And the last thing is this, your database allows you to strategically pastor. I said something on Twitter or on X, or as I've been calling it lately, Twix, earlier this week that kind of got a little bit of an interesting conversation, a little bit of traction behind it. But it was this. It's possible to be a strategic pastor while also being a caring pastor. And it was wild to see the agreement of conversation around that. One of the things of kind of the core content pillars of Productive Pastor is, strategic thinking, strategic leadership. The mission of Productive Pastor is healthy ministry through strategic productivity. And that used to be a lot more of a tension point than I've noticed it to be lately. Folks jumped onto that thread in an overwhelming way, agreeing with that. One person, I've gotten to become friends with the pastor of a church in Houston, of a very, very large church, says this, to say otherwise only displays a lack of maturity or a lack of creativity. Paul was pretty darn strategic and yet loved people really well. Here's the thing. When you are beginning to use your database to think about this as a mechanism to allow us to care for people spiritually in a much better way and to extend our span of care and to do this in a healthy way for ministry, at this point in time in my own ministry, I cannot imagine not having the database and having the systems that, I've kind of formed up over the last decade of what this is, even in a small rural church where nobody touches the database except for me. It allows me to minister and pastor much better because I'm seeing my true church and the true church size that I have. So that's it. 3 things your database does. 1, helps you see your true church. 2, stuffs the cracks that people fall through. And 3, allows you to strategically pastor. Now, if this sounds intriguing, or if you're like saying, Chad, I need this in my life, a couple ways you can move through. Number 1, come hang out at the spring workshop series, because we're going to be talking about a lot of the stuff that undergirds inside of this. Or you might be saying, hey, I actually need very focused help building out the database. If that's you, let me know. Come in the Productive Pastor community on Facebook and say, Chad, please talk about database stuff more. Or, just that. You never know. This might be something that we do develop a learning cohort around. Actually, the very first paid product I ever had in Productive Pastor was a mini learning cohort that stretched out over 3 or 4 months where we built out a healthy, functioning database. And we had some good work done back then. So if this is something that you want to hear more about, let me know. I would much rather talk about the things that you need than the random things I might want to talk about that day. This is a community. I'm the steward of this. I don't own this. I'm the steward of this. I'm alongside of you in the journey. So thank you much for tuning in to the 92nd episode of Productive Pastor. It's always a pleasure, a joy, and an honor to serve you in this way. So until the next time, stay productive, stay healthy, live fully into the work and call that God has given you. And I hope you have a great week.